Hello, everybody. Welcome to Appreciating Poetry. I am your host, Dr. Kelly, um, and we're climbing the ladder of meaning. We're looking at sort of levels of meaning in poems from the least meaningful, but still very effective, just sound, just consonants, vowels, rhythm, rhyme. Uh, a very important part of poetry that's related to song is the phonological or sound level of meaning. Sound can have a very profound unconscious effect in evoking feeling in poems. And then up the ladder a notch to word choices. Individual words are not terribly meaningful when we consider them outside of sentences. However, words do come with emotional associations, many of them. We call those emotional associations connotation. Uh, Poets love to choose words partly on the basis of their necessary dictionary definitions, but also, and to a great extent, by virtue of words' connotations, their emotional baggage that they carry along with them. Sentences make sense. I suppose a basic way to understand a poem is to try to understand the sentences. However, we've already noticed that poetry seems freer to mess around with sentence structure and sort of rearrange things in unusual ways, freer than our ordinary speech or writing. Then one rung above sentences are images. These are groups of words, word formulas that cause us to envision imagery in our minds. And we kind of can't help but picture an image in our mind when certain words in groups instruct us to do so. So if I say blue horse, you kind of can't help but think of a blue horse. Now, many images are also figures of speech. It's very difficult to define a figure of speech, but I can define it negatively by saying that a figure of speech is not literal. And so it's a lot easier to understand figures of speech with concrete examples, and I'm going to get to one very shortly here. So we concluded our last program with a look at this poem from about very late in the last decade of the 18th century. A poem by William Wordsworth, and this poem is known by its first line. She dwelt among the untrodden ways. However, when it was first published, it was entitled Song. So this is our theme early on. We're looking at poems that are very closely related to song, that most basic level of meaning sound. And this poem is like thousands of other poems and thousands of songs in what's called a ballad stanza. A ballad stanza always looks like this. You've got a longer line that's got 8 beats in it, 8 accents, as we say in music, followed by a shorter line that's got 3 accents in it. And I think it's better, especially early on, to think of the rhythm of poetry in musical terms. Poetry originated in song. I admit to you that poetry and song diverged. However, there are still lots of poems that rely upon song-like structures. And of course, any song with words, which is any song, is the words are going to be poetic in one way or another. So while it is true that poetry and song diverged thousands of years ago, they're still pretty closely related. Um, so So this song has the sound, this poem has the sound of a song. It was originally the title song. I don't know why that title got lost, but it did. Now, I'd like to look at a sentence or two or three. And I have to point out that the sentence structure in this poem is extremely complex. Um, now I don't know whether the poet was going out of his way to make the sentence structure complex, but if you're going to make sense out of something, I think two things apply. If you're going to make sense out of something, you're going to have to understand the sentences that it's made out of, something verbal. You're going to have to understand the sentences. That sentence and sense mean the same thing. And the second thing is that although I haven't mentioned this very much, I'm definitely encouraging an analytical approach to poetry. And I kind of encourage an analytical approach to everything. I mean, it's perfectly fine to just let the music sweep over you and just look at the painting and go, that's pretty. There's nothing wrong with that. It's fine. However, you get a deeper understanding if you can really establish facts. And the way to establish facts in things that you don't already know or don't want to look up, and I strongly urge you not to look up she dwelt among the untrodden ways meaning. Uh, you know, meaning is a bottomless well. So you can continue to draw from the well and you can continue to get new understanding. So I think you ought to try to understand the sentences. And sometimes they're really complicated and, you go as far as you can or as far as you want. And every time you understand a little something new, you understand the poem better than you did. So she, unnamed pronoun, she dwelt among the untrodden ways beside the springs of Dove, a maid. So notice that a maid is the same as she. Now, she is a pronoun. Pronouns take the place of nouns. Maid is a noun, and slightly unusually, but not shockingly strange, the pronoun in this case comes before the noun. Now, in terms of sentence structure, we have to get a little bit advanced here. Now, I'm going to say a sentence, and I'm sure you're going to understand this sentence. My nephew Keith is a good dancer. My nephew Keith is a good dancer. Notice that Keith renames nephew. So when I say my nephew Keith, I'm identifying Keith as my nephew. Nephew and Keith are identical. So in sentence structure, when we have a noun that's followed by another noun that merely renames that noun, that has a name, that's called an appositive. And this poem is chock-a-block with appositives. So it's got this pronoun. And it doesn't say that she was a maid. It just says she did some stuff, a maid. So structurally, she and maid are the same as Keith and nephew in my sentence, my nephew Keith is a good dancer. Now, the appositives, these noun that renames other noun. Continue. So it doesn't say she was a maid, and it doesn't say she was a violet, but that's the only way to make sense out of the sentence. Now, don't pay too much attention to punctuation. When you understand sentences, you understand verbs and so forth. Verbs, their subjects, direct objects, if any, and so forth. So the verb here is dwelt. The subject is she. She is repeated in made, and there's no other syntactical, that is sentence structural relation of maid to she. It's just she dwelt somewhere, a maid. And then she dwelt somewhere, a maid, a violet. So this is pretty weird. A violet by a mossy stone. So we've got, and this is quite unusual. So we've got a subject, and then we've got an appositive noun, and then a second appositive noun. That's pretty unusual. And we're going to get at how unusual it is to turn maid into violet in just a minute. But appositives are always identical with the nouns that they follow. So violet is the same as maid, and maid is the same as she. I know she's a pronoun, but these two nouns are both in apposition to, they're both appositives for she. Why is it that way? Well, I don't know. I think it'll come clear to us. Okay, so that's a fairly peculiar sentence structure. And here's another peculiar sentence structure. It's a lot easier to make sense out of than the series of appositives I just pointed out. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be, but she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. So we've got subject and verb. She lived, and we've got another subject and verb. Few is the subject, and could know is the verb. And then we've got another subject and verb. Lucy ceased. Now, I know you maybe didn't expect a whole lot of sentence structure. I will defend myself by saying I'm not talking about grammar. I'm not talking about the past tense or the first person. I'm talking about syntax, that is sentence structure. And I think you gotta, I mean, you register the sentence structure unconsciously. That's what we do when we listen or when we read or talk or write. We don't think about sentence structure. However, to appreciate poetry, you have to I think you should appreciate the sense that the poem is making. And lots of people who are anti-poetry in the world, and there are such people, it just doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense, but the sentences are peculiar. They're not trying to be the efficient, practical sentences that we use when we're ordering lunch. So all perfectly clear into here, and I could talk about independent clauses and dependent clauses and so forth. And then we got a third perfectly clear subject verb unit, and that's the basic sentence structure, the verb and its subject. So we got lived and she, and we got could know and few, and we've got ceased and Lucy, and then we've got is in her grave and she. So all of this makes perfect sense. This conjunction and joins this clause. Clause is just a group of words with a verb in it. So this clause, she lived unknown, and this clause, few could know, are joined by this conjunction. The jun in conjunction is joined. When Lucy ceased to be. So this is a dependent clause, and this clause modifies, like an adverb, this clause. So all of this is real basic. Now, we've got another independent clause separated from these, joined with these by a big but. So but is a conjunction, and is a conjunction. Conjunctions can join any two sentence parts or more. Here, the and the but are joining clauses. It's all perfectly great. Now here's another conjunction. And what is it joining? And the answer is, I don't know. Now, we have an exclamation point. And an exclamation point is kind of a wild card in sentence structure. I was having a conversation with a very intelligent friend of mine recently, and I was claiming that only sentences make sense. And you ought to be able to analyze the sentence that any utterance makes up, unless it's an incomplete sentence, which doesn't really make sense. And my very intelligent friend said, well, what kind of sentence is hooray? And I'm like, that's just an exclamation. And so do we mean something like, I express my triumph with the, what do we call it? Expletive hooray. I don't know. That's something like what we have here. We've got this exclamation point, which is merely a punctuation mark. It's not really, it has no bearing really on sentence structure. However, it's kind of a wild card. We can kind of say anything if we put an exclamation point. If we put an exclamation point behind it, we can kind of say anything like hooray. Or if I hit myself, if I hit my thumb with a hammer, I'm going to say a lot of words. They're not going to be in sentences. And that's kind of what we have here. This is an exclamation. It's like hooray or ouch. I'm going to say words that are stronger than ouch when I hit my thumb with a hammer. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's one of those exclamation words. We call them expletives. How do you look up "oh" in the dictionary? I don't know. But she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. It makes a big difference to me that she is in her grave. Nobody knew her, nobody loved her, nobody praised her, but I knew her. And when she ceased to be, it made a difference to me. So I think this lets us understand something about what poetry does. We don't burst into song when we make the grocery list, the shopping list. We burst into song when we have strong feelings. And now, I don't know anything about the composition of this poem. I can't read the mind of a guy 225 years ago. uh, it's very, very possible that Lucy is a fictional character. And in a way, the speaker of the poem, the me to whom her death makes a great difference, is kind of a fictional character. I mean, people don't just spontaneously erupt in ballad stanzas. Does that mean that this is insincere? No, I think it means that uh, there's a complex mixture of feelings here. And this is the same poet who wrote A Slumber Did My Spirit Seal that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, I don't know how composition, I don't know how poetic composition works, but I don't think somebody thinks I'm going to write about somebody dying. I'm going to write about the feelings that you get when somebody dies. I don't know. I don't know how poetic composition happens. It's a mystery. However, uh, I do know that you can't boil this poem down to she died, it made me sad. Because there's a lot more going on, right? I mean, there's the fact that she was so isolated, the fact that nobody praised her, that's incredibly sad when she was alive. And very much the same regret that we heard in that earlier poem when the speaker said, "A slumber did my spirit seal, I had no human fears." Right? Now she's dead. Now I wish I had let her know. And then there's these images. So she was fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. Uh, so it's a comparison, right? She was beautiful. How beautiful was she? She was as beautiful as the evening star or the morning star. Now, they're not stars. It's a planet. It's the planet Venus. Venus is the goddess of love. Is that relevant? I don't know, but it's not irrelevant because when it says fair as a star, when only one is shining in the sky, I don't think it means all the others were covered with clouds. I think it's that as the sun goes down, one star shows up. And when the sun comes up, one star, actually the planet Venus, stays there after all the rest have gone away. The reason for that is that Venus is a good sized planet, bigger than Mercury. It's very close to the sun and it reflects a lot of light off the sun. It's also white. It's highly reflective. That's the physics behind the astrophysics behind the morning star and the evening star. Does that count here? I don't know, but she's particularly beautiful, particularly fair because she's alone. And that's so good because there's nobody loving this beauty, nobody praising this beauty. Now, it's a simile, it's a comparison of the beauty of Lucy to the beauty of the morning star or the evening star. It's explicit. It's an explicit comparison. She's fair as a star. Now, this brings me to the violet. It doesn't say that she was like a violet. It says she was a violet. I mean, she is the same as maid, is the same as a violet, that series of positives. So this is a very strong figure of speech called metaphor. A simile barely qualifies as a figure of speech, but to say that she, this beautiful young woman, was a violet, that's very strong. So we have to figure out what are the qualities of a violet that she remembers now. I think probably we need first to picture the image, and just by way of digression, if you'll forgive me, the Romans, who knew quite a lot about poetry and poetic technique, fellows like Virgil and Catullus, really good poets, Horace, Juvenal. They had the same word for image and figure of speech. And when I teach poetry in school and we're talking about metaphors, a lot of times my students don't care to distinguish between a metaphor and an image, and that doesn't bother me a bit. That's fine. So we can't help but picture a violet by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye. So it's a very precise, there's a lot of detail in those 14 syllables. Had to do the math. A violet. All right, now. I don't know as much about flowers as I wish I did, especially when I read this. I do know that there's an expression, shrinking violet, a shrinking violet. And the idea is that violets are shy. I gather they don't require a lot of sunlight. I know that they're quite small. They're not big, robust peonies or chrysanthemums. They're not majestic roses. They're these little wild flowers. And they're quite pretty. And they're not that many purpley things in nature. So violets are quite precious. And they always look a little wilty to violets. They're very delicate little flowers. They're not big, robust things. A violet by a mossy stone. What a great contrast. Notice moss and violet, both organic, but the moss is on a stone. Not a great big rock. It's presumably liftable, but a mossy stone. Stone, hard, mineral, heavy, violet, soft, organic, light. Mossy, it takes a long time for things to get mossy. Mossy is an image of age, that it's covered with moss. So the violet fades. The mossy stone stays there for a long time. And the violet is half hidden by the mossy stone. So what does all this mean? I don't know. I mean, we have this tender beauty, and we have this sort of irresistible force of the moss that's half concealing, but not completely concealing. I mean, if anybody had sought Lucy out, they would have loved her. They would have praised her. They would have recognized her beauty. But nobody did. I didn't. And oh, the difference to me. So with this, we've climbed the whole ladder. It's got the sound of a song, this poem. It's got really interesting word choices. I think I'm going to go back and talk about word choice a little bit. First of all, notice that the language is very simple. I mean, when we read A Slumber Did My Spirit Seal, we had to look up the word diurnal. And there was a very strong contrast between the airy-fairy word choices of the first stanza and the scientific empiricist language of the second stanza. Here, pretty consistently, the language is very simple. I love the line that I've got highlighted, nothing but one syllable words, and when you pick another line at random, you see one syllable words, and the 1-2 syllable word that shows up is very just super commonplace word. But look at this first line. She dwelt among the untrodden ways. It's very simple, but elevated in some way. So let me dive into that a little bit. She lived out in the boonies. She lived out in the sticks. She lived out of the way. She didn't live in the busy city. She didn't live where people were gathering and hanging out and having a good time. She was obscure. She was half hidden from the eye. But these words, right? Dwelt. It's just a little bit pumped up, just a little bit higher than saying she lived somewhere or she stayed somewhere. She dwelt among. We don't say among very often. She lived in a county or she lived on a farm. No, she dwelt among the untrodden ways. Untrodden. What a great word. Oh my goodness. I mean, it's theoretically possible, but we can systematically make words up. And it's not like funky or incomprehensible or anything. So there's the fairly commonplace word to tread. I gather that that word is less commonplace today than it used to be. So I guess it's pretty rare now. I suspect strongly that it was less rare 225 years ago to tread. And the past tense of tread is trod. And the past participle of trod, I promised you I wouldn't get into grammar, but if I want to turn the verb to tread into an adjective, it becomes trodden. So the grass is bare where it's been trodden upon. But she dwelt among the untrodden ways. So, I mean, that word is not unprecedented, but you can see that it was systematically formed. But because tread is just a little rarer than step or walk or something like that, it's just a little more, just a little rarer, Rare things are valuable and making it untrodden. Uh, uh, that just slays me. It just grabs me. And ways, untrodden ways. That's kind of a contradiction in term, right? A way is like a pathway, the way forward, the way. It's one of the most basic concepts in all of language. Do you know the way? Yeah, we're on our way. So it means, where people travel. But these are the untrodden ways. So they're not absolutely untrodden. They're just little trodden upon. So my point is that the word choices in this first line are very simple, but they just have a loftier dignity than a more commonplace of saying she lived in a place where nobody else lived. She lived in a lonely region. She dwelt among the untrodden ways. It just has almost a sacred sound to it. Not sound, strictly speaking, it's the connotations of the word choices. Okay, so I meant that as a brief review, but it gave me the chance to kind of go from sound of song to word choice and these very simple words that often have a a weight and a dignity that we might not expect from primarily monosyllables. The longest word in the poem is untrodden, 3 syllables. To sentence, and the sentence structure here is elaborate with series of appositives and then this exclamation that doesn't have any real syntactical structural connection. To image, picture the star when only one is shining in the sky. To metaphor that compares two things without telling you that it's comparing two things. So it's much stronger as a figure of speech than a simile. A simile barely qualifies as a figure of speech. I can compare any two things, but when I don't tell you that I'm comparing two things, wait a minute, she was a violet? That makes the trope, that makes the turn away from ordinary language much stronger. And so I commit a slight error when I jump to metaphor without first considering image. But there's no sequence in all of this. But I would say, very basically, as you're getting better at appreciating poetry, what you're doing is noticing things. So you notice sounds, you notice word choices, and you think about the connotations, the emotional associations with words. You think about sentence structure because that's the basic unit of sense. You think about images, and honestly, I sort of tend to gloss over images, which is not cool. But it's because they're so automatic. If I say only one star is in the sky, you can't help it. You picture the image. And then metaphor, which is really, I would say that image is actually the heart and soul of poetry. But metaphor takes imagery and kind of gives it another dimension, a reverberant dimension, because this image is compared explicitly or implicitly to something else. Now, what I meant to talk about today was this, which is Songs of Innocence by William Blake. Now, William Blake is one of the very, very few great visual artists who is also a supremely great poet. Now, I promise you, I'm not going to focus on poets, their lives. I'm not even going to focus on history. I just want to get good with you at confronting poems and trying to appreciate them. However, this guy, Blake, illustrated his own poems, but that doesn't do justice to Blake because he printed the poems and the pictures on one plate. He made the books himself, and he didn't use movable type like you see in every other book. He put the words like Songs of Innocence and the picture on one plate. He printed from the plate, and then he tinted the print with watercolor. So he's an incredibly innovative genius, far beyond. So Songs of Innocence, and look at this tree that's just full of life. We got, I love the fact that this bird, whoops, gave the game away. This bird has a very similar shape to this floral shape that's growing out of the N in Songs. And there's a bunch of human figures, little bitty human figure here. Here's a guy leaning back on the middle part of the N and writing with some sort of stylus. Here's a guy playing a woodwind instrument. There's all kind of birds. and they're all just apparently burgeoning out of the words songs of innocence. You can hardly even make out the of. It's just part of the foliage. So I guess I'm gonna look at that next time, and I'm giving up on one poem, one episode. It's looking more and more like one poem, 2 or 3 episodes, but that's okay because I'm just sharing with you my pleasure in reading these poems. So come again next week and we'll start talking. We'll start talking about Songs of Innocence, which is a big group of poems, and we'll just do a few of them. Okie dokie. Uh-oh, I have a chat. Who is, I have a question. Who is Dove? Oh, that's a good question. Um, now, I will tell you that I happen to know something about this author, William Wordsworth, and his life. So I, you read the poem with me. You didn't know what Dove was. You knew it was a proper name because it was capitalized, but you can't go by spelling, capitalization, punctuation. So I will tell you what I just happen to know because I've read about this poem. The author, William Wordsworth, lived in a house with his sister Dorothy, and the name of that house was Dove Cottage. And it was called Dove Cottage because it was very close to the river Dove. Now, as an American who has visited the UK on a couple of occasions, what the UK calls a river, we in America would probably call a creek. Now, the Thames is big, but our creeks around here, Peachtree Creek and so forth. I mean, they'd be called rivers in the United Kingdom. So the Dove is a very small river, and it's way out in the middle of nowhere in the Lake District of England. So she dwelt beside the springs of Dove. Now, see, it could have been any old river, right? But Dove, the word Dove, and I don't know if the name of the river is related to the name of the bird, but the bird Dove has all kinds of associations of peace and gentleness and so forth. Springs, a very evocative word. Uh, uh, it's very symbolic, really. And I'm going to have to talk about symbols when I go to Blake, but a spring you see is a source of something. So it's a symbol of creativity. William Blake says the cistern contains, the water tank contains, the fountain overflows. So here's a river that may well be fed by a spring. I don't know, but it's spring is in the plural here. So springs of Dove just sounds like a great place to be, spring with this connotation of creativity. And Dove, I don't know if the word dove for the river is related to the word dove, the bird, but it certainly sounds like it's a homonym, at least, of the name of a bird that symbolizes peace and gentleness and so forth. So that's the answer to the question. Dove isn't a who, it's not exactly a place, it's a topographical feature, namely a very small river. Thank you for that question. And please ask questions in these sessions. And thank you so much, my dear friends. And I will see you at appreciatingpoetry4.wordpress.com. And I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.